Why did everyone freeze when the little girl walked in? It wasn't just the sound of the door slamming. It was the kind of silence that happens when something shatters the rhythm of ordinary life, when even the air seems to stop breathing. Sarah Chun had been sitting at the far end of Irene's diner, back to the wall, habit born from too many years in uniform. The coffee in front of her had gone cold hours ago. She didn't come for the coffee anyway. She came for quiet, or what passed for it in Pinewood Falls, Montana. A small town stitched together by frozen highways, diesel trucks, and people who pretended not to notice each other's ghosts. The frost still clung to the windows, turning the morning light into a dull silver haze. Outside, a line of motorcycles stood like armored horses in the gravel lot. Inside, their riders, the Iron Brotherhood, hunched over plates of bacon and eggs, leather jackets creaking with every movement. They looked dangerous to most, invisible to others. Sarah just saw men trying to outlive something they'd never talk about. She'd been one of them once, not a biker but a soldier, a sniper, a ghost in places maps pretended didn't exist. Now she was just the quiet woman who rents the cabin by the ridge. And then the door crashed open. The sound sliced through the diner, metal bell, wooden frame, a single harsh clang. Every conversation died mid-sentence. The girl stood in the doorway, breathing like she'd outrun the world itself. Her jacket, pink, torn at the shoulder, hung crooked, the zipper half broken. A trickle of blood traced down from her nose. Her hair, golden and wild, clung to her tear-streaked face. "Please," she gasped, her voice shaking. "Please, somebody, they're hurting my mama." For a moment, no one moved. Even the radio in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Sarah's hand tightened around her mug until the ceramic creaked. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, too small to be that scared, too fragile to be carrying that kind of fear in her eyes. Blake Carter, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, the unofficial leader of the Iron Brotherhood, was the first to stand. But Sarah was already on her feet before she realized it. Instinct, not choice. The little girl's words kept echoing. "They're hurting my mama." She crouched, leveling her eyes with the child. "Hey," she said softly, voice steady, calm, the way she'd spoken to civilians during hostage rescues overseas. "What's your name?" "Ruby," the girl whispered. "Ruby Dixon." "Okay, Ruby." Sarah brushed a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. "Can you tell me what happened?" "He came back," Ruby said, trembling. "Mama said to run. She said he'd kill her this time." Behind them, the bikers stirred, boots scraping the floor. Blake exchanged glances with his men, Doc, Mikey, Ox, Leon. They didn't need words. Sarah saw it in their faces, the same look she'd seen in soldiers just before breaching a door, a mixture of anger, focus, and something like dread. "Where is she?" Sarah asked gently. "Shady Pines," Ruby said, pointing toward the highway. "Trailer 23. The name hit Sarah like a memory she didn't want. Shady Pines, a cluster of rusted mobile homes at the edge of town, a place people ended up when life stopped giving second chances. Irene, the diner owner, appeared with a damp towel, pressing it gently to Ruby's face. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she murmured. "These folks will help your mama." Sarah straightened. "How far?" "5 minutes," Ruby whispered. Blake looked toward Sarah. "You in?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm in." There wasn't a plan, not yet, just movement. Blake barked an order and the Iron Brotherhood rose as one. Jackets zipped, helmets grabbed, boots pounded across the linoleum. Sarah followed them out into the biting air. The engines roared to life, one after another, a metallic thunder rolling through the valley. Sarah swung her leg over her matte black dual sport, an old military model she'd rebuilt herself, and fell in behind the pack. Frost and gravel sprayed under the tires as they tore down Highway 47, sunlight flashing off chrome like gunfire. Wind tore at her hair, but her mind was locked in that narrow, sharp space where fear turns to purpose. She told herself she was done with this life. The chaos, the adrenaline, the moral math of deciding who deserves to live. But that little girl's voice had burned all that away. 5 minutes. That's all they had. The trailer park appeared like a scar in the snow, a sprawl of sagging homes, rusted cars, and satellite dishes pointed at nothing. Trailer 23 sat near the back, blue siding faded to gray, a front step barely hanging on. The door was cracked open. Sarah cut her engine first. The sudden quiet was deafening. Then came the sound, a man's voice, hoarse and mean, barking inside the trailer. A woman's cry followed, thin and broken. Blake dismounted beside her. "Same rules as before," he said quietly. "Fast, clean, no weapons unless we have to." Sarah nodded. Her hand brushed the inside of her jacket, where a small 9 rested in its holster, not out of threat but habit. She didn't want to use it, not today. They moved in formation, muscle memory from different wars, but the same instincts guiding them. Doc and Ox flanked the door. Mikey circled to the back window. Sarah took the lead beside Blake. Another crash sounded from inside, glass shattering, then a scream. Blake pushed the door open. The stench of beer and fear hit her first. The living room was a chaos of overturned furniture and shattered bottles. In the center stood a man with his arm raised, veins bulging in his neck, ready to strike. His victim, a woman, bruised and cornered, tried to shield her face. Her lip was bleeding, her eyes wild. "Garrett," the woman cried. "Please, Ruby's gone, she's safe." "Shut up," he roared, grabbing her by the wrist. Sarah didn't think, she moved. In 2 strides she crossed the room, voice like steel. "Step away from her." Garrett turned, confusion flashing to fury. Who the hell? He saw the bikers, then her, tall, eyes cold, stance trained. Something in his lizard brain recognized the danger, but he was too drunk, too full of pride to care. "This is my house," he spat. "You got no right." "You lost that right," Sarah cut in, "the second you raised your hand." He lunged. It wasn't a fight so much as a collision. He swung wild, a haymaker born of rage, but Sarah slipped under it, pivoted, and shoved him backward. Her body remembered the movement, training that never left. Garrett stumbled, hit the wall, and froze when he saw Ox blocking the doorway. Doc stepped in, his calm voice slicing through the tension. "Easy now, you're done." "Get out of my house," Garrett yelled, thrashing, but Ox's massive hand clamped onto his shoulder like a vice. The fight went out of him fast. The woman, Kristen Dixon, slumped against the wall, sobbing quietly. Sarah knelt beside her, scanning for injuries. Split lip, bruising, possible fracture near the eye, nothing immediately fatal, but the emotional damage that was something no medic could fix. "You're safe now," Sarah said softly. "Ruby's at the diner, she's okay." Kristen's breath hitched. She ran to you." "She did, smart girl." The sirens came a minute later, faint at first, then growing. Irene must have called the sheriff's office. Blake glanced out the window. "They'll handle him from here," he muttered, though his tone said he didn't believe it. Sarah helped Kristen to her feet. "You want to press charges?" Kristen hesitated. Her eyes darted to Garrett, now handcuffed by a deputy who looked barely awake, then back to Sarah. "He'll kill me," she whispered. "Not if we have anything to say about it," Sarah replied. The deputies led Garrett out, muttering something about domestic disturbances. Sarah caught the look on one deputy's face, tired, indifferent. She'd seen that look before, in war zones and cities alike. The look of someone who just wanted the problem to go away. When the cruiser drove off, the silence that followed was heavier than before. The woman's shoulders sagged. "I don't have anywhere to go," she murmured. "Everything's there, my job, Ruby's school." Sarah exchanged a glance with Blake. "We'll figure it out," she said, "but you're not staying here tonight." By afternoon, the hospital's fluorescent lights hummed overhead while nurses moved with quiet efficiency. Kristen sat on an exam bed, bandages on her lip, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her hospital gown. Sarah leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed. They say no broken bones, Kristen murmured. Just bruises. Bruises heal, Sarah said. Fear doesn't, that's the part you fight. Kristen looked up. You sound like you've been through it. Sarah didn't answer. Her past wasn't the point. Ruby's coming, she said instead. Mikey bringing her. Kristen's eyes filled with tears. She shouldn't have had to see any of this. She saw a mother who told her to run, Sarah replied. That's courage, not shame. Moments later, the door opened and Ruby rushed in, flinging herself into her mother's arms. The sound that followed that broken sob of reunion hit Sarah harder than she expected. She turned away, pretending to check her phone. Blake appeared at the door, voice low. We need to talk. In the hallway, he said, Deputy Morrison Kelly thinks Garrett won't stay locked up long. Sheriff's department's compromised. Sarah nodded grimly. I figured. She also said there's talk he's connected to a local dealer, Damon Pike. Then this isn't just domestic violence, Sarah said. It's systemic rot. Blake studied her for a moment. You sure you want in on this? You didn't sign up for it. Sarah's jaw tightened. Nobody ever signs up for the right thing. They just stop pretending someone else will do it. He smiled faintly. You sound like one of us. I was one of you, she said, just in a different war. That night the diner lights glowed against the frost. Inside, Ruby slept on a couch upstairs, safe for the first time in days. Kristen sat at the table with Irene, sipping tea. Downstairs, Sarah stood in the parking lot, watching the snow begin to fall. Blake joined her, smoke curling from the cigarette in his hand. You could have left, he said quietly. Most would have. Sarah didn't look at him. I've seen what happens when people freeze instead of act. What happens? She turned, eyes distant. Children grow up thinking nobody comes when they scream. They stood in silence for a long while, listening to the muffled hum of the diner, the steady fall of snow, and somewhere inside, the soft breathing of a child who still believed in heroes. Tomorrow would bring questions, hearings, threats, maybe worse. But tonight, they'd done something simple. Something right. And sometimes that had to be enough. Why was the courthouse so quiet when the judge read his name? Sarah stood in the back row, hands folded behind her like she used to in briefings that decided who lived and who didn't. The air inside Pinewood Falls County Courthouse felt old, like dust and distrust had been living here longer than justice ever had. Garrett Sloan sat 2 rows ahead, wrists cuffed, head bowed just enough to feign humility. His lawyer, polished suit, city arrogance whispered in his ear. The sheriff, Nash, leaned against the wall with the patience of a man who believed the outcome was already written. Sarah could read a battlefield long before the first shot. This one was stacked. She wasn't supposed to be here. She promised herself she'd keep distance. But when she'd heard that Garrett was being arraigned for simple domestic disturbance instead of felony assault, something in her chest burned cold. Kristen hadn't come. She was still shaken, hiding at Irene's apartment with Ruby. Sarah had offered to be her proxy, to take notes, to make sure the system didn't quietly bury what happened. She didn't expect justice. She just wanted to witness the way it failed. State versus Garrett Michael Sloan, the bailiff announced. The sound of paper shuffling filled the room, and then silence. Judge Martha Cunningham, small, gray-haired, eyes sharp as a knife, looked down from the bench. Charges reduced to misdemeanor assault, violation of restraining order and trespass. Mr. Sloan, how do you plead? Not guilty, his lawyer replied smoothly. Sarah's jaw tightened. She caught Nash's smirk from across the room. A cop who'd already decided guilt didn't matter, only control. The judge sighed. Bail set at $25,000 cash or bond. Case continued. A tap of the gavel, one crack, the sound of a system pretending to work. Garrett turned slightly, eyes scanning the room. They found Sarah. Recognition. Then a slow smile that wasn't human, wasn't even proud, it was a promise. She'd seen that look before. on men who believed rules protected them. Outside, the sky was a hard gray. Sarah walked down the courthouse steps, her boots echoing on the concrete. She lit a cigarette she didn't plan to finish. The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the cold. Kelly Morrison, the deputy who'd warned them, appeared beside her, civilian clothes and tired eyes. "You saw it," she said quietly. "I saw it," Sarah replied. "They're going to let him out." Kelly nodded once. "Someone's paying the bail, probably Pike's people." Pike, the name tasted like rust. The local supplier. "Worse," Kelly said. "He's the spine of the operation, runs product through half the county. Nash looks the other way, Chambers, the DA, takes donations. It's all connected." Sarah exhaled smoke, slow and steady. "You realize that means Kristen's not safe." "I know," Kelly said. "That's why I'm telling you off record. But if you act outside the law, I can't cover you." Sarah gave a faint, humorless smile. "Never asked anyone to." That night, wind howled over Pinewood Falls. Snow drifted sideways across the diner windows. Upstairs, Kristen tried to sleep but couldn't. Ruby had finally drifted off beside her, small hand curled under her cheek. Sarah sat in the chair near the window, watching headlights sweep across the parking lot. Every sound made her tense. Every creak in the wood made her reach for the sidearm she'd sworn she'd stopped carrying. The knock came at midnight, soft, deliberate. Sarah moved first, finger against her lips, signaling Kristen to stay quiet. She opened the door a fraction. Blake stood there, snow in his beard, eyes grim. "He's out," he said. Sarah didn't even blink. "How long ago?" "An hour, posted bail in cash. No one knows who fronted it." "Pike," she said again, voice flat. Blake nodded. "Kelly says Nash signed the release order personally." Kristen's voice broke the silence. "He'll come for us, won't he?" Sarah turned to her. "Not tonight, but soon, maybe." Kristen's hands shook. "I can't keep running. Ruby needs school, I need work." "What you need," Sarah said gently, "is to stay alive long enough to have those things again." There was no comfort in her tone, only truth. Sometimes that was the kindest thing you could give. Blake exhaled hard, fogging the air. "We've got a place north, Doc's cousin's hunting cabin near Glacier. Isolated, stocked off the grid." Kristen hesitated. "You want me to hide?" "No," Sarah said softly. "We want you to breathe." The ride north was brutal. Wind clawed at their jackets. The highway stretched black and endless. Sarah rode point, her headlight carving through snow like a blade. Behind her, Blake's convoy followed, Doc, Mikey, Ox, and in the center, Kristen with Ruby asleep against her chest. The little girl's arms were wrapped around her mother, like she could hold the world together by sheer will. At mile marker 94, Sarah saw movement, headlights in the distance. A black pickup slowing as it passed them in the opposite lane. She couldn't see the driver's face, but something about the way the truck lingered on the shoulder made her gut twist. Garrett or Pike's men. She tapped her brakes twice, signal. Blake's lights flashed back, saw it. They didn't stop, just increased speed. In snow, you don't engage what you can outrun. They reached the cabin 2 hours later, deep in the woods. Smoke already rose from the chimney. Frank, Doc's cousin, had beaten them there. Sarah helped Kristen and Ruby inside. The cabin was small but warm, 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, shelves of old hunting gear. It smelled like pine and dust. Ruby blinked sleepily. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," Sarah said. The girl nodded, too tired to question. As Kristen tucked her in, Sarah stepped onto the porch. Blake joined her, breath clouding in the freezing air. "You ever get tired of being the one who steps in?" he asked. Sarah stared at the tree line. "Every damn day." "Then why keep doing it?" She thought about that, the faces she'd seen overseas, the ones who never got saved because paperwork said they weren't strategic assets. The night she'd been ordered to stand down while civilians screamed from a burning house. The way silence became complicity. Because someone has to, she said finally. Blake nodded, as if he already knew. Morning came gray and brittle. Kristen made coffee on the propane stove. Ruby sat by the fire drawing pictures with crayons Sarah had found in a drawer. They looked like hope, a stick-figure family, a house, a sun with too many rays. Sarah sipped her coffee, standing near the window. The woods outside were still too still. She'd been trained to read silence. This one wasn't peace, it was pause. The radio on the table crackled, Blake's voice on the other end. Morrison just called. CPS got an anonymous complaint. Sarah stiffened. What kind of complaint? That Ruby's in an unsafe environment. Social worker wants to check on her. Jesus, Sarah muttered. They're turning the system on her. Kristen overheard, setting down her mug. They're taking my child. Not yet, Sarah said, keeping her tone calm. They're trying to scare you to make you look unstable. Classic pressure tactic. Kristen's voice broke. How do I fight that? With the truth, Sarah said, and with us beside you. But even as she said it, Sarah's stomach twisted. She fought real enemies, insurgents, mercenaries, men who hid behind ideology. But this was different. This was the slow, suffocating war of paperwork and power, where bullets were replaced by signatures. By noon, the social worker called. Her name was Teresa Barnes, and she spoke with professional sympathy. We just need to confirm Ruby's well-being, she said. Could we meet somewhere neutral? Sarah arranged for Cornerstone Baptist Church, neutral ground, witnesses present. It wasn't much, but it bought time. After the call, Ruby approached her. Miss Sarah. Yeah. The girl held up the drawing she'd been working on, a house with two figures standing outside, hand in hand. That's you, Ruby said proudly. You helped us. Sarah felt her throat tighten. That's very nice of you, kiddo. You're like a soldier, right? Sarah hesitated, something like that. Ruby smiled. Then you can beat the bad guys. Sarah forced a smile back, but her mind was elsewhere. Soldiers didn't beat bad guys, they delayed them. They bought time for others to run. That was the part nobody told the kids. That night, as the others slept, Sarah stepped outside again. Snow had stopped, but the cold bit deep. She looked toward the trees, endless, dark, indifferent. Somewhere out there, Garrett Sloan was free, nursing his hate, his pride, and maybe orders from someone higher. She thought of the judge's gavel, the sheriff's smirk, the DA's polite indifference. The whole machine. Her hand went to the small scar under her collarbone, a souvenir from Kandahar. She remembered her commander's words from years ago. We don't fight because we're sure we'll win. We fight because we can't stand what happens if we don't. Behind her, Ruby stirred in her sleep. Kristen murmured softly, dreaming of something fragile. Sarah stayed on the porch until dawn, guarding the silence like it was her post. The war hadn't started yet, but she could feel it coming, slow, deliberate, and personal. And this time, it wouldn't be fought in deserts or cities. It would be fought in courtrooms, in back roads, in the hearts of people too scared to speak. Sarah took one last breath of the icy air and whispered to herself, sometimes the hardest part of a mission isn't getting in, it's staying human after you do. Why did the headlights stop just short of the cabin? Sarah noticed them first, two pale beams cutting through the trees, motionless for several seconds before vanishing behind the pines. No sound of an engine, no snow crunching, just silence. She stepped onto the porch, rifle slung low across her chest, her breath fogging the cold. It was 02:47. The others were asleep inside, Kristen and Ruby in one room, Doc dozing on the couch. Sarah waited. The forest didn't lie. It had a rhythm, branches creaking, wind whispering, distant cracks of frozen bark. But when predators moved, even the night held its breath. She heard it now, a single twig snapping in the dark. Sarah eased her finger toward the safety. She didn't want to fight, not here, not with a child inside. but she wasn't going to be taken by surprise either. Then came the low rumble of an engine starting, receding down the dirt road. She stayed outside until the sound disappeared completely. When she finally stepped back inside, Doc was sitting up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Problem. Someone came by," she said quietly. "Didn't stay. Could have been locals. Could have been Garrett." Doc studied her face. "You think he found us?" "I think someone wants us to believe he can." They both knew what that meant: psychological warfare. Fear was cheaper than bullets. Morning brought a calm that felt staged. Kristen made oatmeal for Ruby, humming softly to keep her voice from shaking. Frank checked the generator fuel. Sarah stayed by the window, eyes on the tree line. "You didn't sleep," Kristen said quietly. Sarah glanced over. "Old habit." "You used to be military." Sarah nodded once. "Army, Special Operations Group." Kristen hesitated. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah considered that. "I miss knowing who the enemy was." Kristen gave a tired smile. Now the enemy wears a badge and a smile." Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily. Ruby was at the table drawing again, this time a forest with a cabin in the center. She added a stick figure with a ponytail standing outside holding a rifle. Sarah looked at it and felt something ache inside her chest. Not pride, not fear, something heavier. Responsibility. By noon, the radio cracked to life. Blake's voice came through, distorted by static. "Sarah, you there?" "Go ahead." "News from town. Pike's people are talking. Word is, Sloane's promising to make things right his way. Sheriff Nash told the department to stay out of any personal disputes. That's code for hands off." Sarah's jaw tightened. "He's coming." "Soon. Kelly's doing what she can, but she's outnumbered." "What about the DA?" "Chambers, he's golfing with Pike this morning." Of course he was. In Pinewood Falls, justice didn't wear a robe, it wore loyalty. "Keep eyes on the highway," Sarah said. "If they start heading north, I want an hour's notice." "Copy that." The radio went silent. Kristen had been listening. "We can't keep hiding forever." "I know." "So what then?" Sarah looked out the window again. "Then we stop hiding." That afternoon, Sarah took a walk down to the frozen stream 1/2 mile from the cabin. She needed to think. The crunch of snow under her boots was the only sound. The forest was beautiful, in a brutal, uncaring way. It reminded her of Afghanistan in winter, the way beauty could exist beside danger without apology. She crouched by the ice, ran her glove across its surface and watched the reflection staring back. The face was older than she remembered, more lines, more weight. But the eyes were still the same, alert, searching, ready. "You promised yourself you were done," she muttered. She could still hear her therapist's voice from years ago. "You can't save everyone, Sarah. You can only stop yourself from drowning." But maybe drowning was the point. Maybe that was how you remembered you were alive. When she got back to the cabin, Ruby met her at the door. "Miss Sarah, a lady on the phone for you." Sarah frowned, stepping inside. The old landline sat on the table. She lifted the receiver. "This is Sarah." "Captain Chun." The voice was calm, low. "Kelly Morrison. Listen carefully. Nash just met with Pike downtown. I don't know what they said, but 15 minutes later, Garrett Sloane walked into the sheriff's office and walked out with his firearm license reinstated." Sarah's hand froze. "They gave a convicted abuser a gun." "Technically, he's only a misdemeanor now," Kelly said bitterly. "Paperwork magic." "How long before he uses it?" "I don't know, but I can't stop him. Officially, I'm supposed to notify you that the restraining order remains pending administrative review." Sarah closed her eyes. "Meaning?" "Meaning you're on your own." By dusk, the snow turned to sleet. The cabin windows fogged with condensation. The fire hissed. Ruby had fallen asleep by the hearth, curled beneath a blanket. Kristen sat beside her, eyes glassy from exhaustion. Sarah cleaned her rifle on the table, motion mechanical. It wasn't defiance, it was meditation. "You really think he'll come here?" Kristen asked. "I think men like him need to finish what they start." Kristen shuddered. "Then what do we do?" "We prepare," Sarah said. "Not for war, for survival." Kristen watched her work, the slow, practiced assembly of steel and purpose. "How can you be so calm?" Sarah gave a faint smile. "I'm not calm, I'm controlled. There's a difference." Kristen nodded, almost admiringly. "Ruby looks up to you, you know. She keeps asking if you're a hero." Sarah's hand stopped. "Don't tell her that." "Why not?" "Because heroes don't wake up every night remembering who they couldn't save." Kristen was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, "You saved us." Sarah didn't answer. Later, when everyone else was asleep, Sarah went outside again. The air was sharp, the kind that cut through fabric and memory alike. She walked to the edge of the tree line and stared out toward the faint glow of the highway far below. Headlights again, small, distant, weaving through the dark. She crouched, flipped her night-optic monocular down, and zoomed in. Two vehicles this time, a black pickup and a sedan following close, moving slow, coordinated. She keyed her radio. "Blake, this is Chun. You got eyes on movement northbound Highway 2. A moment of static, then Blake's voice tense. "Yeah, that's them. Two cars left Pike's Place 10 minutes ago. No plates, looks like they're heading your way." "How many?" "3, maybe 4 in each." "Armed?" "Probably. Pike doesn't send greeting cards." Sarah exhaled. "Copy, you stay put. If they find us, you'll only be chasing ghosts." "Sarah." "Negative, stay dark." She clicked off. The vehicles disappeared behind a ridge. She gave them another 20 minutes before moving. Back inside, she quietly woke Doc. "We might have company," she whispered. His expression hardened instantly. "You sure?" "Pretty sure." He nodded. "What's the play?" "We don't let them near the cabin." The next hour stretched like wire. Frank killed the lights. Sarah positioned herself behind the woodpile near the porch, rifle resting across her knees. Doc watched the back trail. Inside, Kristen sat beside Ruby, whispering soft prayers. Then headlights again, closer this time. Crunch of tires on frozen dirt. Two vehicles stopped at the base of the drive. Engines idled. Sarah raised her scope. The first truck door opened. A man stepped out, heavy coat, baseball cap, shotgun slung, not Garrett, one of Pike's runners. She recognized the type, middle-aged, half-brave, fully stupid. He started up the drive, another man behind him. Sarah waited until they reached the 50-yard mark, then stepped out of cover. "That's close enough," she called. The men froze, startled by the sudden voice. "Easy, lady," the first one said. "We just want to talk." "You brought a shotgun to talk." He grinned. "Insurance policy." "You should have checked the fine print," she said. The second man raised his rifle halfway. "We ain't here for you. We're here for the woman and the kid." "Not happening." "Orders from Pike. Sloan wants his family back." Sarah felt the words hit like a slap. Family, that's what they called ownership now. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. She just leveled her rifle. "Tell Pike if he sends anyone else up here, I'll start counting bodies." The man's grin faded. "You think you scare us?" "No," Sarah said, "but I know what happens when I get scared." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the first man spat into the snow. "This ain't over." They turned back, climbed into their trucks and drove off, engines fading into the dark. Doc emerged from the shadows. "They'll report back." "I want them to," Sarah said. "Let Pike know we're not hiding anymore." Inside, Ruby was awake, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Was that them?" she asked. Sarah knelt beside her. "Yeah, but they're gone now." "Will they come back?" "Maybe." Ruby's lower lip trembled. Aren't you scared? Sarah paused, then said softly, yeah, every minute. Then why don't you run away too? Because some things chase you even when you run. Ruby seemed to think about that. Then she held out her rabbit. You can borrow Milo till it's over. He keeps me brave. Sarah took it carefully, the worn little toy with one ear half torn. Thanks, soldier. The girl smiled, small but real, and drifted back to sleep. Sarah sat by the fire the rest of the night, Milo in her lap, rifle beside her. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the sound of a distant engine, not close enough to threaten, just close enough to remind. At dawn, Blake's voice came over the radio again. Word spreading. Nash knows you turned Pike's men away. He's calling it obstruction. Sarah chuckled without humor. Guess that makes me a criminal now. You always did have timing, Blake said. We'll back you. I know, but this isn't about us anymore. It's about what comes next. What does come next? Sarah looked toward the light creeping through the window, catching dust like falling snow. We bring the truth to daylight, she said. If the law won't protect them, we expose the ones who keep it blind. She didn't know yet how, only that it would cost her something. Maybe her freedom, maybe her life. But as Ruby stirred in her sleep, clutching her toy rabbit tight, Sarah felt that old certainty she'd thought she'd buried in foreign sand. The mission wasn't to win. The mission was to make sure innocence had a fighting chance. Why did the sheriff's office lights stay on past midnight? Sarah asked herself that question 3 nights in a row, watching from a parked truck on the ridge above town. Pinewood Falls slept early, the kind of place where porch lights meant safety and silence meant peace. But not there, not in that brick building with its single flag and its 2-way mirrors. Something was happening inside, and Sarah intended to find out. The snow had thinned, replaced by black ice and a bitter wind that stung her face. Blake sat beside her, binoculars in hand, cigarette dangling unlit between his fingers. Third night in a row, he muttered. Pike's sedan out front again. Nash must really like midnight company. Sarah's eyes narrowed. He's laundering, cash exchange, maybe documents. Think they're stupid enough to keep records. People like them always do. Ego loves proof. Blake smirked faintly. And what do we do when we find it? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on the glowing windows. We take it to someone who can burn the rot out from the top. Blake laughed softly, meaning Kelly. He nodded slowly. You trust her. I trust her enough to give her a chance to prove herself. Sarah leaned back in the seat, the leather creaking. This isn't about bullets anymore, Blake. It's about exposure, the kind that leaves no shadows to hide in. He blew out a long breath, fogging the windshield. Exposure gets people killed, too. Sarah gave a faint, dry smile. So does silence. Morning brought no answers, only tension. At the diner, the Brotherhood gathered leather, coffee, scars. Sarah sat at the end of the counter, studying a faded town map spread beneath her hand. The others leaned in, tracing routes with gloved fingers. Doc pointed. Here, Pike's warehouse, near the old freight yard. No cameras, no alarms. It's where he stores most of the product before it hits the trucks. Blake added, and this, tapping the sheriff's office, is where the paperwork gets blessed. Confiscation orders, false reports, clearance signatures. Sarah looked between them. We need evidence, records, recordings, anything that ties Nash and Pike. Ox grunted. You're thinking break-in. I'm thinking retrieval, she said. Mikey frowned. You really want to go up against law enforcement? They'll bury us. Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. They already tried. Blake leaned back, arms crossed. This isn't a bar brawl, Sarah. Once we cross that line, there's no coming back. She gave him a quiet look. There never is. That night the snow returned soft, slow, forgiving. Perfect cover. Sarah dressed in layers of black. Not combat gear, not anymore, but practical, muted, efficient. She tied her hair back, checked her tools. Small flashlight, lockpick set, phone, camera, voice recorder. Blake pulled up in a black pickup, headlights off. You sure you don't want backup inside? No, you stay on comms. Copy that. Sarah moved like smoke through the alley behind the sheriff's office. The back entrance had a keypad, new but predictable. Most small-town departments didn't rotate codes often. She tried the obvious ones: 1985, Nash's badge year. Denied. 1992, department founding. Denied. Then she tried 9/11. Clicking. Of course, she murmured, pushing the door open. The office was dark, the hum of a refrigerator filling the silence. Her boots made no sound on the linoleum as she moved past framed commendations, Nash's smiling face shaking hands with state officials, plaques about community partnership, lies in gold lettering. She found the records room easily. The lock was cheap, the files weren't. Rows of boxes, shelves stacked with years of reports. She moved fast, scanning labels, confiscation orders, evidence logs, forfeiture claims. Then she saw it: property seizures, 2023-2024. She flipped through the folders, each one stamped with signatures she recognized: Nash, Chambers, and beneath them initials marked DP. Damon Pike. There it was, the paper trail. She pulled out her phone, snapped photos page after page. Then she found something worse: protective order amendments. Kristen Dixon's restraining order. The official document had been altered, Garrett's name struck out, rewritten, labeled withdrawn by petitioner. Except Kristen had never withdrawn it. Sarah's pulse slowed, not sped up. That was her tell the moment she entered her calm zone, the eye of controlled fury. Blake, she whispered into the mic, got it. Photos taken. Also found tampering on court records. Copy, his voice came through. Get out clean. She started to move, then froze. Footsteps. 2 sets close. Voices male, laughing low. Sarah slipped behind a filing cabinet, breath steady. Boss said he'd meet Pike tomorrow at the freight yard, one said, once the cash moved before the audit. Yeah, the other replied. Said that woman stirring things up again, the soldier chick. Nash wants her handled quietly. Sarah's grip tightened on the edge of the cabinet. Handled quietly. She waited for the footsteps to fade, then slipped out, silent as a shadow. At the exit she paused. There on the desk by the door sat Nash's badge. She stared at it for a long moment, not out of fear but reflection. Symbols mattered once. Now they were camouflage. By dawn, she and Blake were back at the diner. Kelly met them in a booth, civilian jacket, hat pulled low. You shouldn't have done that, Kelly whispered, eyes darting around. You mean you shouldn't have had to, Sarah replied, sliding her phone across the table. Kelly scrolled through the photos, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger to something like grief. Jesus, they forged a restraining order. That's a felony. And the seizures? Sarah asked. Worse, this means Pike's operation isn't just drug money. It's laundering through impound auctions and property forfeitures. Nash signs, Pike buys, Chambers clears the books. Sarah leaned forward. Can you take it upstate? I can try, Kelly said, but if they catch me, I'm finished, maybe worse. Then we make it public, Sarah said. Kelly shook her head. Not yet. We need corroboration, physical evidence, recordings, witness testimony. Otherwise, it's just pictures of paper. Blake groaned. You're asking for proof from people who'd rather die than talk. Kelly nodded. Welcome to Pinewood Falls. 2 days later, the first move came from Nash. A warrant, failure to comply with federal firearm regulations. A lie so clean it almost glowed. Blake's shop was raided first, then Doc's clinic, then Irene's diner, every one of them labeled associated properties. Sarah's name wasn't on the paperwork, but the message was clear. You're next. Kristen and Ruby were still in the cabin, safe for now. But for now was a currency Sarah no longer trusted. That night she stood in the snow again, watching the town's glow flicker on the horizon. She felt the pull, that old soldier's instinct whispering to strike first, to end the threat clean. But she wasn't in uniform anymore. And war wasn't always the answer. Sometimes exposure was. She turned to Blake. "We're done playing defense. What's the plan?" "Tomorrow night, freight yard. Nash meets Pike at midnight. We get audio, video, and witnesses. Once we have it, Kelly sends it upstate. We dump the rest online." Blake grinned grim. "Old school takedown." Sarah adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "No guns unless we have to. We do this clean." "You think clean exists anymore?" She gave him a look. "It does until we stop believing it does." The freight yard was a graveyard of forgotten industry. Rusted cranes, broken tracks, the smell of diesel and rain. Sarah crouched on a catwalk above the main platform, headset in, camera light off. Below, a single SUV rolled in. Sheriff Nash stepped out, coat collar turned up, face half hidden. A second car arrived minutes later, Pike's. The man himself emerged, immaculate coat, smirk carved into marble. They shook hands. Sarah hit record. "You said you'd handle it." Pike's voice carried smooth, confident. "I will," Nash said. "She's a ghost, no family, no attachments. I'll write it up as a break-in gone wrong." Sarah's stomach turned. They were planning her death like it was a business meeting. "What about the kid and her mother?" Pike asked. "Collateral," Nash said. "People forget quick around here." Sarah's jaw tightened. Her pulse didn't. She learned long ago fear wastes oxygen, focus doesn't. Then Nash said something that froze her blood. "She's got help. Veterans, bikers. The woman's name is Sarah Chun." Pike chuckled. "Then make it look like old enemies. You know how these soldiers are, always breaking before they fade." Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger, not of her rifle, but of her recording app. She pressed save. That was the proof. All of it. Blake's voice crackled in her ear. "You got it." "I got it." "Then get out." But movement below caught her eye, one of Pike's men, flashlight beam sweeping upward. It paused on the catwalk, right where she was. "Hold," she whispered. The beam shifted closer. Then crack. The old metal gave way under her boot, snapping like bone. Sarah dropped 6 feet, landing hard on the platform below. The men shouted, "Up there!" Nash's voice roared, "Get her!" Sarah ran. Footsteps pounded behind her, gunshots echoing off steel. She sprinted between cargo containers, breath burning in her throat. The old instincts came alive, angles, cover, exit routes. She slid behind a forklift as bullets sparked off the frame. Blake's voice, "We're coming." "Negative," she hissed, "too hot." She ducked under a chain-link fence, tore her jacket, and emerged onto the side road. A black pickup screeched into view, Blake at the wheel. She leapt into the bed as he floored it. More shots, glass shattered. The truck fishtailed on ice, then regained grip. They didn't stop until the highway swallowed the town's lights. Only then did Sarah breathe again. "You get the file?" Blake asked, panting. She held up her phone, cracked screen flickering. "Got it." "Then we hit them with it." Sarah looked out at the night, the endless road ahead, the darkness behind. "No," she said softly. "We let it hit itself." By dawn, Kelly had the recording in her hands. Her face was pale, trembling. "You realize this means both of you are targets now?" Sarah nodded. "We were the moment we didn't look away." Kelly exhaled. "I'll take it to the state investigator. If they move fast, we can secure warrants." "And if they do?" Blake asked. "Then I leak it myself." Sarah smiled faintly. "Guess we're all criminals now." That evening, as Sarah drove back toward the cabin, she thought of Ruby, her quiet bravery, her drawings, her belief that good people always win. She envied that belief. She parked, stepped inside. Ruby ran to her, wrapping her arms tight around Sarah's waist. "You're back." Sarah crouched, hugged her close. "Always." Kristen's eyes were tired but hopeful. "Did it work?" Sarah looked at her, at the bruises mostly healed, at the fear slowly fading, and said quietly, "It's starting to." But in her heart she knew better. It wasn't over. It had just begun. Outside, snow started again, falling soft and soundless. Inside, Ruby drew another picture, 3 figures now, standing together under a sky full of stars. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt something close to peace. Not because the war was over, but because she wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Why did the wind sound like gunfire that night? Sarah heard it before anyone else, that sharp, rhythmic whistle through the eaves that made her flinch every few seconds. Old reflexes die slow. Outside, the storm howled over the ridge, the kind of Montana blizzard that could erase tire tracks and sins alike. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled weakly. Ruby was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a quilt. Kristen sat nearby, running her fingers through her daughter's hair, whispering a prayer she didn't quite remember anymore. Blake leaned against the wall, shotgun propped beside him, eyes on the frosted window. Sarah checked the locks a third time. The cold bit her hands even through gloves. "They know," Blake said quietly. She nodded. "The recording hit the state investigator's desk this morning," Kelly confirmed. "It's already circulating online." "Then Nash and Pike are cornered." "Cornered men don't surrender, they bite." The radio on the table hissed with static. Then Kelly's voice came through, strained, rushed. "Sarah, you copy?" "Go ahead." "I'm in the city's safe house. The bureau's moving, but it'll take 48 hours to get warrants served. In the meantime," her voice cracked with interference, "word is, Pike's people are looking for you. They think you've got backup copies." Sarah's gaze flicked toward Ruby. "Tell me something I don't know." "Listen," Kelly continued. "They hit one of Pike's warehouses. 2 dead. They're cleaning house. You need to relocate now." "Negative," Sarah said. "Storm's locking everything down. No safe passage till morning." "Then keep your lights low and your head lower." The signal died. Blake exhaled. "She's right, if Pike thinks the evidence came from you." "He already does." The words hung heavy in the small room. 2 hours later, the first sign came, headlights, faint through the snow. Sarah saw them from the window, 3 vehicles crawling up the mountain road, slow and deliberate. Her pulse didn't race, it steadied. "Blake," she said quietly. "Yeah." "Wake them." Kristen stirred, half asleep, panic rising when she saw Sarah reach for her rifle. "What's happening?" "They found us." Ruby sat up, blinking. "Miss Sarah." Sarah knelt beside her, voice calm, steady. "You and your mom are going to the cellar. You remember where that is?" Ruby nodded, trembling. "I need you to be brave again, okay? The kind of brave that doesn't make noise." The girl swallowed hard. "Like soldiers." "Exactly like soldiers." Kristen's hands shook as she guided Ruby toward the trapdoor behind the pantry. "Please don't." Sarah stopped her gently. "You keep her safe, that's the mission." Kristen nodded, eyes wet. "What's yours?" Sarah chambered around. "Mine's to make sure you have one." Outside, the storm screamed. The truck stopped at the clearing. Doors slammed. Voices shouted over the wind. Blake crouched near the window, watching shapes move through the snow. 6, no 8, maybe more in the back. Sarah took a slow breath. "They'll flank first, 2 on each side." "You've done this before," Blake said, almost admiring. "Too many times." She slid open the side window just enough to aim. The first figure appeared through the blizzard, moving low, cautious. Sarah squeezed the trigger, one sharp crack. The figure dropped soundlessly into white. The others ducked, shouting. Return fire shattered the window frame. Splinters rained across the floor. Blake fired twice, covering her angle. They're testing us. Let 'em. Another round hit the door. The hinges screamed but held. Sarah keyed the radio on her shoulder. Dock status. East Ridge. We're inbound but roads are bad. ETA. 10 minutes. Make it 5. The assault came fast. A Molotov arced through the storm, shattering against the porch. Flames crawled up the siding, bright and hungry. Sarah grabbed the extinguisher, doused it quick, smoke filling the room. They're trying to flush us out, Blake coughed. Then they don't know who's inside. She peered through the haze, another shadow moving near the shed. 2 flashes, muzzle fire. Sarah ducked, rolled, fired back. The shape folded into the snow. For a moment, everything was sound and color, gunfire, wind, sparks of orange against the white void. Then silence. Blake reloaded, panting. You hit. Sarah shook her head. A trickle of blood ran from a cut on her temple, nothing more. From below, Ruby's muffled voice. Mama, I'm scared. Kristen's whisper floated back. She's here, she's here. Sarah closed her eyes for a second. Stay alive, she told herself. That's the only order. Doc's engine roared up the hill like salvation. Headlights swept across the tree line, blinding the attackers. Sarah used the distraction to move outside, snow crunching under her boots. Blake covered her from the doorway. You're crazy. Probably, she said, disappearing into the blizzard. She moved low, weaving between trees. Shapes flickered ahead, 2 men trying to circle toward the back. She raised her rifle but hesitated. Too close to the cabin. A missed shot could go through the walls. She took another breath, slid the knife from her thigh sheath, and closed the distance quietly. When she was 5 feet behind them, she said softly, You picked the wrong mountain. They turned too late. It was fast, clean, brutal. The snow swallowed every sound. By the time she returned, the gunfire had stopped. The headlights from Doc's truck illuminated broken tracks and dark stains already being covered by falling snow. Doc climbed out, shotgun ready. Everyone okay? Inside, Sarah said. Check them. He went down to the cellar, emerging a minute later with Ruby clinging to his coat. The girl's face lit up when she saw Sarah. You came back. Always, Sarah said, voice low. Kristen's eyes filled with tears, relief, disbelief, grief, all tangled together. They would have killed us. Sarah wiped soot from her cheek. They tried. Blake leaned against the doorway, breathing hard. That's not the end of it, is it? Sarah looked out into the storm. The flames from the porch had died, leaving only smoke and darkness. No, she said quietly. That was just the message. Morning came slow, gray and heavy with aftermath. The cabin smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Broken glass crunched under their boots. Doc stitched the graze on Blake's arm. Ruby sat beside Sarah, silent, small fingers tracing the grooves on Sarah's dog tags. Were you scared? Ruby asked suddenly. Sarah hesitated. Yes. You didn't look scared. That's the trick, Sarah said. Ruby thought about that. Mama says brave means doing something even when you're afraid. Sarah smiled faintly. Then she's right. Blake looked over. We can't stay. They'll regroup by nightfall. Kristen's voice trembled. Where can we go? Sarah pulled a folded map from her pocket. There's a ranger station 30 miles west. Old radio tower still active. If Kelly's safe, she can direct extraction from there. Doc frowned. 30 miles in a snowstorm with a kid. We move slow, stay off roads, use the tree line. They'll expect us to head east toward town. Blake stared at her. You really think we'll make it? Sarah met his eyes. We have to. They left the cabin by noon, bundled tight. Ruby perched in a sled tied behind Blake's snowmobile. The forest loomed silent around them, endless and white. For hours they moved without words, the crunch of treads, the hiss of snow, the hum of engines the only sound. Sarah rode rear guard, scanning the ridges, every sense alive. When the sun dipped low, painting the pines gold, they stopped by a frozen creek. The cold bit deep, but the air felt cleaner, freer. Ruby pointed at the sky. It's pretty. Sarah looked up. Yeah, sometimes beauty hides in bad places. Kristen smiled weakly. You sound like you've done this before. Sarah chuckled softly. I've run from worse with less reason to hope. That night they camped beneath a rocky overhang, fire small and hidden. Snow drifted in lazy spirals. Blake passed around a thermos of coffee. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, Kristen broke the silence. Why are you doing this? You could have walked away. Sarah stared into the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, soft and dangerous. Because once, a family just like yours needed help. I didn't get there in time. No one asked what she meant. They didn't have to. The weight in her voice said everything. Ruby crawled over, curling up beside her. It's okay, the girl murmured. You're here now. Sarah looked down at her, the tiny heartbeat that somehow made the world worth saving, and whispered, Yeah, I'm here. At dawn, they reached the ridge. Below them, the valley stretched out vast, white, endless. In the distance, the outline of the old Ranger Tower cut through the mist like a spine. Blake checked the map. 10 miles. Doc scanned the horizon. Smoke behind us. They're coming. Sarah tightened her gloves. Then we move. The descent was steep, treacherous. Ice cracked under the snowmobiles. Halfway down, engines echoed behind them, faint but closing. Go, Sarah shouted. Blake gunned his throttle, pulling the sled behind him. Ruby clung to the sides, face buried against her coat. Sarah stayed back, covering the rear, her breath sharp, controlled, every motion deliberate. A bullet zipped past her shoulder, close enough to sting the air. Another, then another. She fired twice over her shoulder, not to kill, to delay. The chase turned chaotic, snow spraying, metal screaming, shouts lost in the wind. At the base of the ridge, Blake's sled hit a patch of ice, flipping sideways. Ruby tumbled into the snowbank, crying out. Kristen screamed her name. Sarah swerved, skidding to a stop. I've got her. She scooped Ruby up, checking her fast. You okay? The girl nodded, coughing. Just scared. Sarah smiled tightly. Me too. She turned, saw the pursuers cresting the ridge above, dark shapes against pale sky. Go, she yelled to Blake. Get them to the tower. What about you? Someone gotta make sure they don't follow. She planted her boots, reloaded, and faced the ridge. For a long second the world shrank, just her, the wind, and the echo of boots approaching through snow. And for the first time in years she felt clarity. Not rage, not fear, just purpose. She whispered to herself. Hold the line. Back at the tower, miles away, Ruby watched the horizon through binoculars too big for her face. The ridge was just a blur of white. Will she come back? She asked softly. Kristen knelt beside her. She will, she always does. Blake's jaw was tight as he scanned the distance. God, I hope so. The wind carried faint thunder, not from the storm, but from something human, defiant. And somewhere out there, Sarah Chun stood alone on that frozen ridge, the snow rising around her like ghosts of every battle she'd ever fought. She wasn't running anymore. Not from war. Not from guilt. Not from herself. She was the line between violence and innocence, between what was broken and what still deserved to live. And sometimes she thought that was enough. Why did the snow stop falling when she stood her ground? Sarah could feel it, that quiet before something ends. The wind calmed, the sky turned the color of cold iron, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to listen. She stood halfway up the ridge, rifle steady against her shoulder, breath forming slow clouds that vanished into the white. Below her, the valley stretched endless and silent, where Blake's snowmobiles had vanished moments before, carrying Kristen and Ruby toward the Ranger Tower. Above her, the sound of engines grew louder. They were coming. She wasn't afraid, not in the way most people meant it. Fear was for the unprepared. This was calculation, acceptance. The math of survival. The rhythm of war that never really left her bones. Sarah crouched, checked her mag, exhaled. 6 left, she muttered. Make them count. The first figure appeared on the ridge, black coat, rifle slung low, visor fogged with frost. Another followed, then 3 more. They moved like predators, confident, careless. Pike's men. She recognized one, the scar across his cheek, the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. She remembered his voice from the freight yard, the one who'd said, "We'll handle her quietly." "Quiet's over," Sarah whispered. She fired once. The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. The man dropped instantly, red staining the snow. The others scattered, shouting. Sarah moved down the slope, using fallen logs for cover. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat steady, too steady, the way it always was when death came close. At the tower, Blake gripped his binoculars. The ridge in the distance flared with light muzzle flashes, faint but unmistakable. "She's engaging," he said. Doc swore, "She can't hold that ridge alone." Kristen clutched Ruby tight. "We have to help her." Blake shook his head. "If we go back, we lose you. That's not what she'd want." Ruby's voice was small but certain. "But she's my hero." Blake's eyes softened for the briefest second. "Mine too, kid." He turned to Doc. "Radio Kelly. Tell her we've got active contact. Tell her to bring everyone she can." Doc nodded, sprinting for the tower stairs. The old CB unit crackled with static as he adjusted the frequency. Blake looked back toward the ridge, toward the flashes in the snow, and whispered, "Hold, Sarah, just hold." Back on the ridge, the world had narrowed to motion and instinct. Sarah fired twice, ducked behind a fallen spruce as rounds tore bark around her. One grazed her shoulder. She barely noticed. She rolled, shifted position, flanked right. The wind carried voices, shouting, angry, close. She caught a glimpse of Pike himself emerging from behind a truck, fur collar pulled high, pistol in hand. So he came. The man who'd started it all. He raised his weapon and called out, "You don't have to die here, soldier." Sarah shouted back, "Then stop sending men to kill children." He laughed, that ugly, easy laugh of someone who thought power made him untouchable. "They're not children, they're leverage." Something inside Sarah went very, very still. For a moment, she wasn't on a Montana ridge. She was back in Kandahar, watching a father beg for his daughter's life through a wall of flames. Same cruelty, different language. She whispered, "You talk too much." Then she moved. 3 shots, fast, precise, surgical. 2 men fell, Pike dove behind cover, firing blindly. Sarah sprinted left, sliding behind an embankment, snow spraying like shrapnel. She ejected her mag, slammed another in, breath controlled. The pain in her shoulder pulsed, but she ignored it. Pain was just proof she was still alive. A flash to her right, movement. She turned, fired once, caught another one mid-stride. 4 left, she murmured. At the tower, Kelly's voice came through the radio, urgent, high. "Blake, I've got the Bureau en route, 20 minutes out. Helicopter inbound from Helena." "Not fast enough," Blake said. "She knew the risk," Kelly said. "Don't make it for nothing." He stared at the map spread across the snowmobile hood. "We can flank her position, draw fire." "Negative," Kelly snapped. "You'll only complicate the extraction." He killed the radio, jaw clenched. "She's not dying up there alone." Doc looked up. "Then what are we waiting for?" Blake met his eyes. 10 minutes. We give her 10 more minutes to hold. Sarah's breathing grew rougher. The adrenaline was fatting, the blood loss making her vision pulse at the edges. She crawled behind a log, pulled out her field dressing, and wrapped it tight around her arm. Her hands were shaking. She laughed quietly. "Guess I'm not 20 anymore." Pike's voice echoed across the ridge. "You think this changes anything? You're just one woman." Sarah called back. "That's what they said about every woman who ever stood up." She rose, fired 3 quick shots, then dropped back as bullets ripped through the branches above. Snow fell in heavy sheets, mooting the world. "To left," she whispered. She could see Pike now, closer than before, pistol steady, breath visible in the air. He was smiling. "You know what I like about soldiers," he said. "They die believing it meant something." Sarah smiled back. "You know what I like about monsters." He frowned. "They never see it coming." The shot echoed once, clear and final. Pike staggered, looked confused, then fell backward into the snow. Sarah didn't cheer, she didn't move. She just sat there, breathing, her rifle heavy in her lap. Then she heard it, another sound, faint but distinct. Engines, multiple. Not Pike's men. Helicopters. At the tower, Ruby screamed, "Look!" A dark shape broke through the clouds, a helicopter banking low over the ridge, rotors whipping the snow into spirals. Blake grinned. She did it. Doc exhaled, if she's still alive to see it. Kristen grabbed Ruby's hand. "She's alive, I can feel it." The radio crackled again. Kelly's voice came through, loud over rotor noise. "Chopper approaching ridge. We have eyes on movement, one survivor." Ruby clutched her mother tighter, whispering, "That's her." On the ridge, Sarah looked up as the helicopter descended, wind ripping at her coat. The floodlights washed everything in white. She tried to raise her hand, but her arm wouldn't cooperate. Voices shouted, boots hit the snow. Men in tactical gear surrounded her, federal, clean, precise. A medic knelt beside her, pressing gauze to her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. Sarah tried to laugh but coughed instead. "Tell me something I don't know." Her vision blurred. She could see Pike's body a few feet away, still, small, almost peaceful. The medic followed her gaze. "He's gone." Sarah nodded faintly. "Good." Her eyelids felt heavy. The medic said something about blood pressure, about evacuation, about staying awake. She wasn't listening. Her mind drifted to Ruby's drawings, to the quiet mornings at the diner, to the way the wind through pine trees almost sounded like ocean waves if you listened long enough. She thought of every face she hadn't saved. And the one she had. Maybe that's what redemption is, she thought. Not fixing everything, just one thing. The medic's voice faded, replaced by another, softer, younger. Ruby's voice. "Miss Sarah, you're like a soldier, right?" She smiled weakly, something like that. Hours later, in a sterile hospital room 2 towns over, Sarah woke to the sound of monitors beeping. Blake sat in a chair by the window, bruised, bandaged, smiling. "Welcome back," he said. She tried to sit up. "Ruby." "Safe, Kristen too. Kelly says the Bureau took Nash and half his department into custody. Whole state's watching now." Sarah exhaled. Relief wasn't an emotion anymore, it was exhaustion. She stared at the ceiling. "So it's over." Blake shook his head. "It's never over, but you gave it a damn good pause." Sarah chuckled softly. "I'll take that." Kelly entered, clipboard in hand, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You did it, Captain. Your name's all over the reports." Sarah frowned, not interested in fame. Kelly's voice softened. "Then what are you interested in?" Sarah looked toward the window, at the faint sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Peace." Kelly smiled sadly. "You think that's real?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Maybe not for me, but for them, yeah." 3 days later, Sarah stood outside the hospital, coat collar high, snow melting on the pavement. Kristen and Ruby waited by a car. Ruby ran toward her the moment she saw her. "You're okay," the girl shouted, wrapping her arms around Sarah's waist. Sarah smiled, hugging her back. So are you. Ruby held up a drawing, new, colorful, messy. It showed a soldier standing in front of a house, shield raised, a mother and child behind her. Above them, the word safe now. Sarah's throat tightened. You made this for me. Ruby grinned. Mama says heroes don't always wear capes, sometimes they wear coats. Sarah laughed, a sound that felt strange and new. Your mama's smart. Kristen stepped forward, eyes shining. We owe you everything. No, Sarah said softly. You don't owe me a thing, just live, that's payment enough. That night back at the cabin, rebuilt, silent, peaceful, Sarah sat on the porch with Blake. The firelight flickered inside. The sky stretched clear, full of stars. Blake passed her a flask. So what now? She looked at the mountains. Maybe I stop running. He nodded. And if the past catches up? She smiled faintly. Then I'll do what I always do. What's that? Stand my ground. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore. Snow began to fall again, gentle, forgiving, endless. And as it drifted over the mountains, Sarah whispered to herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did peace feel heavier than war? Sarah asked herself that every morning she woke up in silence. No sirens, no radio chatter, no countdown in her head. Just the whisper of wind through the pines, and the creak of a cabin that had seen too much. 2 weeks had passed since the firefight on the ridge. Snow still blanketed the valley, soft and pure, as if the land itself was trying to forget what had bled into it. Pike was gone, Nash was in custody, Kelly had testified, the Bureau had wrapped the case with neat bureaucratic tape. But justice never feels neat. Not when the ghosts are still awake. Sarah stood on the porch, coffee steaming in her hand, shoulders stiff beneath the bandages. She watched the mountains, trying to remember what stillness used to mean. Behind her, Ruby's laughter drifted through the open door. The sound was light, reckless, unafraid. It filled spaces Sarah didn't know were empty. Kristen was inside cooking breakfast. The smell of eggs and wood smoke mixed with the cold air, domestic, ordinary. Sarah smiled at that. Ordinary was a luxury. Blake's truck crunched up the driveway, tires cutting fresh tracks in the snow. He climbed out, beard frosted, carrying a brown envelope. Morning, Captain, he said. Don't call me that, she replied, but her tone was soft. He handed her the envelope. From Kelly, official paperwork. She said you'll want to see it. Sarah tore it open. Inside was a single sheet stamped with a government seal, a commendation of civic bravery. Below it, her name. She stared at it for a long moment, then folded it once and handed it back. You keep it. Blake raised an eyebrow. You earned it. I didn't do it for medals. He nodded slowly. Then what did you do it for? She looked toward the cabin where Ruby's laughter echoed again. For that. Later that day, they drove into town. Pinewood Falls looked different now. Not better, not healed, but awake. People made eye contact again. Windows that had been shuttered were open. The sheriff's office sign was gone, replaced by a temporary one that simply read Community Protection Bureau. Kelly stood outside directing a cleanup crew. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes tired but bright. When she saw Sarah, she smiled. Look who's finally off the mountain. Sarah nodded. Looks like you cleaned house. Not all of it, Kelly said, but it's a start. They walked to the sidewalk, passing a bulletin board plastered with flyers, job openings, town hall meetings, a missing pet notice. Kelly tapped one of them. We're rebuilding the department. Thought maybe you'd want to join. Sarah laughed softly. You want me back behind a badge? I want someone who won't flinch when it matters. Sarah hesitated. I've spent my whole life fighting. I'm not sure I can do it in uniform again. Kelly studied her. Maybe it's not about fighting anymore. Maybe it's about standing. Sarah looked away, eyes tracing the snowmelt running along the gutter. Standing I can do. That evening she found herself back at the diner. Irene had reopened it, same cracked windows, same smell of coffee and fried hope. Locals filled the booths, talking about weather, politics, anything that wasn't the past month. Irene poured Sarah a cup without asking. "You're a quiet celebrity now." "I'd rather be anonymous," Sarah said. "Too late, people need stories. You gave 'em one." Sarah stirred her coffee. "They don't know the whole story." Irene smiled. "They don't need to, just knowing someone stood up is enough." Sarah looked around the room at old men laughing, at a mother scolding her kid, at life daring to move forward. She thought about how many towns she'd passed through after deployments, always looking for this and never finding it. A place where people didn't just survive, they endured. When she drove back that night, the sky was clear, full of stars sharp enough to cut through the dark. Ruby was waiting on the porch in her pajamas, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You promised to show me the stars," she said. Sarah smiled. "I did I?" They sat together on the steps, breath fogging the air. Ruby pointed upward. "Which one, yours?" Sarah tilted her head. "I never picked one." "Why not?" "Because they're all the same distance from broken things," Sarah said softly. "They just shine anyway." Ruby frowned in concentration, then nodded like she understood more than she should. "Then we can share one." Sarah chuckled. "Deal." The next morning, Sarah packed a small bag, maps, rations, a compass. Blake watched from the truck. "You sure about this?" he asked. She zipped the bag shut. "Yeah, I need distance, a week, maybe two." "Running again?" She shook her head. "Walking this time." He offered his hand. "You come back, okay?" "I always do." She turned toward the mountains, the same ones that had nearly killed her, the same ones that had saved her. The snow was melting now, rivers cutting through the ice like veins returning to life. She started walking, each step slower, steadier, lighter. 3 days later, she reached a ridge she didn't remember. The valley below stretched wide and green, the first signs of spring threading through the frost. She built a small fire and sat with her back to a rock, letting the quiet fill her. No missions, no radio, no need to look over her shoulder. In that silence, she thought about everything she'd carried. The guilt, the rage, the constant need to justify why she was still alive. And for the first time, she didn't push those thoughts away. She let them sit beside her, like old comrades she no longer had to fight. She whispered to the flames, "You can stop now." She didn't know if she meant the fire or herself. When she closed her eyes, she saw Ruby's drawing again, the soldier, the mother, the child, the word safe. For the first time, she believed it. Down in town, life moved on. The Brotherhood reopened their garage. Doc's clinic had a line out the door. Irene's diner added a new dish to the menu, Chun's chili, in quiet tribute. Kelly stood outside the courthouse steps, giving a statement to a crowd of reporters. "Sometimes," she said, "justice doesn't come from the system. It comes from people who remind the system what it's supposed to be." The cameras flashed. Somewhere far above the noise, Sarah's story became legend. But legends are just echoes of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. When Sarah returned to Pinewood Falls 2 weeks later, the snow was gone. The ground was muddy, the air smelled like rain. Ruby spotted her first, running down the road, hair flying, shouting her name. "Miss Sarah." Sarah crouched just in time to catch her. "You grew." Ruby grinned. "Mama says I grow every time I sleep." "Then don't stop." Kristen walked up, smiling. "You disappeared on us." "Needed to remember how to breathe," Sarah said. Kristen nodded. "I get that." They walked back toward the cabin together. The sky broke open in a streak of sunlight. "You know," Kristen said, Ruby still talks about being a soldier when she grows up. Sarah smiled. Then she'll be a good one, the kind who fights with her heart first. Kristen looked at her. And you? Sarah thought about it. I think I'll teach her how not to need soldiers. That night the three of them sat on the porch again. The stars were out. The air smelled of thawed earth and pine. Ruby leaned against Sarah, half asleep. You think bad people ever change, she murmured. Sarah stared at the horizon. Maybe not, but good people can get louder. Ruby smiled. Then we'll be loud. Yeah, Sarah whispered, we will. Blake's truck pulled up again, headlights cutting through the dark. He stepped out holding 2 coffees. Figured you'd be out here. Sarah took one. You ever get tired of showing up? He smirked. You ever get tired of pretending you don't like it? They sat side by side, not talking. The silence felt earned. Below them, the valley slept easy for the first time in months. The scars were still there, on the town, on the people, on her. But scars don't mean weakness. They mean you healed in places you shouldn't have survived. Later, when the fire burned low, Ruby spoke again, eyes half closed. Miss Sarah, what's bravery? Sarah thought about it, about war, about loss, about a child who'd run to strangers because nobody else would listen. She said quietly, bravery isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing even when you are. Ruby smiled sleepily. Then you're brave every day. Sarah brushed the girl's hair back from her forehead. Not every day, but some days that's enough. When the night finally went still, Sarah looked up at the stars Ruby had named for them. She whispered to herself, you fought enough battles, now learn how to live. And somewhere deep inside, the soldier in her finally stood down. Not defeated. Just at peace. Why did the air feel different that morning? Maybe it was the thaw. Maybe it was the way the valley finally sounded alive again. Birds, running water, the hush of trees shaking off their frost. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, Sarah woke without reaching for a weapon. She stood at the cabin door, mug in hand, watching the light crawl across the hills. Spring had come to Pinewood Falls. The snow was retreating, revealing the scars of winter, broken fences, half-buried tools, ground still bruised from ice. But there was life under it, green, stubborn, returning. Inside, Ruby hummed while drawing at the kitchen table, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in fierce concentration. Kristen moved quietly around her, coffee in one hand, the other steadying the paper as if the drawing were something sacred. It was a house again, the same small cabin, but now surrounded by flowers. 3 figures stood outside. A woman, a child, and another woman with a rifle slung across her back and a smile on her face. Sarah looked at it, half amused, half undone. You keep making me taller every time. Ruby grinned. Heroes are supposed to be tall. Sarah laughed softly. Heroes are supposed to be human. Then you're both, Ruby said and went back to coloring. Later that day, Sarah walked down the dirt road into town. The sky was clean and bright, the kind of blue that didn't look real. Her arm still ached, but she could raise it again. Her lungs no longer burned from the cold. She wore no uniform, no insignia, just a simple jacket, sleeves rolled, boots worn from the miles she'd earned. People waved as she passed. The mechanic tipped his cap. A boy on a bicycle slowed just to say, "Thank you," before pedaling off again. It was strange, this kindness. Not worship, not fame, just recognition. The quiet way small towns say we saw what you did, and we remember. At the corner store, Kelly was waiting beside her cruiser, a new one without county markings. She handed Sarah a folder, official closure of the Pike case, federal oversight sticking around for a while. Sarah flipped through it. Guess they learned something. Kelly smiled faintly. Guess you taught them. Sarah closed the folder. And you, staying sheriff. Kelly hesitated. Maybe I just want to be a person for a bit. Sarah nodded. Good, the world needs more of those. Kelly looked at her. So what will you do now? Sarah took a long breath. Live, maybe. Learn what that means when it's not a mission. By evening, the diner was full again. Irene had replaced the broken glass, scrubbed the soot from the walls. The jukebox played something old Patsy Cline, soft and scratchy. Blake sat at the counter nursing black coffee, while Doc argued with a rancher about football. The brotherhood was smaller now, quieter, but the weight they carried had shifted from rage to purpose. When Sarah walked in, Blake raised his mug. Look who finally decided to join civilization. She smirked. You call this civilization? Close enough. He gestured to the stool beside him. Sit, you look lighter. Feel lighter, she admitted. He studied her. You think it's over. Sarah watched the steam rise from her coffee. I think it's never really over, but maybe it doesn't have to hurt forever. Blake nodded slowly. You ever wonder why you survived when others did? All the time. And you ever find an answer? She thought about Ruby, about Kristen's quiet strength, about Kelly standing up in court when it could have ended her career. Yeah, she said, because somebody still needed to. He smiled. That's good enough for me. When she returned home that night, the cabin was warm and full of small noises, dishes being washed. A lullaby hummed softly from the other room. Ruby had fallen asleep with a flashlight in her hand, open book on her chest. Kristen looked up from the couch. You okay? Sarah nodded. Better than okay. Kristen smiled. You ever think about staying, for good, I mean? Sarah leaned against the doorframe, considering. I used to think peace was something you had to find, she said. Now I think it's something you build one quiet moment at a time. Kristen's eyes softened. Then stay long enough to build a few. Sarah hesitated, then sat down beside her. Maybe I will. They didn't speak again for a while. The fire popped. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, cleansing, patient. It felt like the world exhaling. A week later, Sarah took Ruby to the shooting range outside town. The girl wore oversized ear protection and held a .22 rifle almost as big as she was. Sarah crouched beside her, guiding her hands. It's not about power, she said. It's about control. You respect it, it respects you. Ruby aimed at the target, bit her lip, fired. The shot hit just outside the center ring. Not bad, Sarah said. Ruby turned, proud. You think I'll ever be as good as you? Sarah smiled. Better, because you won't need to use it. Ruby lowered the rifle carefully. Can I still learn? Sarah ruffled her hair. Always. On the drive back, Ruby stared out the window at the mountains. You think bad people are gone now? Sarah shook her head. No, bad people never go away, but good ones get stronger. That's how balance works. Ruby thought about that for a long time. Then we just have to keep being good. Sarah glanced at her and smiled. That's the whole mission, kid. Summer came fast. The valley turned green. Rivers ran clear again. The old Ranger Tower, once a refuge, became a lookout post for hikers. And on one quiet afternoon, Sarah returned there alone, unarmed, her scars fading to pale silver. She climbed the steps slowly, each one creaking under her boots. At the top, the world stretched open, endless forest, rivers like veins of glass, sunlight slicing through the clouds. She stood there, breathing it in. For years, she'd been waiting for this, the stillness that didn't feel like a trap. She whispered, almost to herself. You made it. Wind brushed her hair, carrying faint echoes of things she'd buried. Voices of comrades, the weight of orders, the silence after missions gone wrong. They were still there, but softer now. Memories, not ghosts. She pulled Ruby's last drawing from her pocket. It was crumpled, edges torn. She pinned it to the tower railing with a small nail. It fluttered in the wind, a house, 2 women, a child, and the word safe now. Sarah smiled. You're right, kid, we are. That night back at the cabin, she sat by the fire writing a letter. Her handwriting was slow, careful, every word chosen like it mattered. Dear Ruby, if you ever read this when you're grown, I hope you remember that fear isn't the enemy. Forgetting who you are is. You saw more than a child should, but you never stopped believing in kindness. That's what makes you strong. If one day someone else cries for help and the world looks away, don't. Even if your voice shakes, even if you stand alone. You once asked me what bravery means. I think it's this, showing up even when the world tells you not to. Love, Sarah. She folded the letter and tucked it into an envelope, sealing it with a drop of wax from the candle beside her. Then she leaned back, listening to the fire crackle, the steady rain outside, and the faint laughter of Ruby in her sleep. At dawn, Sarah stepped outside again. The air smelled like earth and new beginnings. In the distance, the town bell rang, one long, gentle chime. She watched the valley wake smoke curling from chimneys, light catching on wet leaves. For the first time, she felt no urge to move. No next mission, no unfinished business. Just this. A world imperfect but alive. A child safe. A woman forgiven by her own heart. She whispered into the wind, "You did your part." And for once, the silence that followed didn't ache. It answered. Weeks passed. People said they saw her helping rebuild the old bridge, teaching self-defense at the community center, reading quietly in the diner corner where everything began. No one called her captain anymore. Just Sarah. And in a town that had learned courage the hard way, that name was enough. One evening, Kelly visited the cabin. She found Sarah on the porch, whittling a piece of pine into something small and delicate. Kelly smiled. Can't stay still even in peace, huh? Sarah held up the carving, a little wooden bird, wings spread. Habit. Looks free, Kelly said. Sarah nodded. That's the point. Kelly handed her an envelope. State recognition ceremony next month. They're calling it the Pinewood Courage Commendation. Sarah took it, turned it over in her hands, then set it aside. Let the others go. Blake, Doc, I've had enough ceremonies. Kelly studied her for a long moment. You really think you can disappear? Sarah looked toward the forest. I'm not disappearing, I'm finally here. As twilight fell, Ruby came running out with muddy hands and a grin. Miss Sarah, look what I found. She held out a small seedling in a tin can. Sarah smiled. A tree. Ruby nodded proudly. We're gonna plant it. Mama says things that grow from hard places are the strongest. Sarah crouched, pressing her palm over Ruby's tiny hands. She's right. Let's put it where it can see the sunrise. They walked together to the edge of the clearing. Ruby dug into the soil while Sarah steadied the little tree. When they finished, the seedling stood straight, trembling slightly in the wind. Ruby looked up. Think it'll live? Sarah smiled. If we keep caring for it, yeah, that's how life works. Ruby nodded seriously. Then we'll take turns. Sarah laughed, the sound low and warm. Deal. Night fell soft and clear. The new tree stood under the stars, its leaves whispering like promises. Inside, the fire burned low, casting slow shadows across the cabin walls. Sarah sat by the window, Ruby asleep on her lap, and watched the reflection of starlight ripple in her coffee. She thought about all the wars that end without winners, and how sometimes the smallest victories, a home rebuilt, a child unafraid, were the only ones that mattered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Sarah closed her eyes, breathed it in, and whispered, not to anyone, just to the quiet. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.